The rain in Seattle doesn't just fall. It hangs in the air, a cold gray mist that blurs the edges of everything, soaking into your clothes until you feel the chill in your bones. Standing at the edge of the open grave at Lakeview Cemetery, I didn't feel the cold. I felt nothing at all. I watched the pristine mahogany casket holding my father's body lower into the mud. No tears. Just the rhythmic, mechanical hum of the lowering straps. 3 feet away stood Talia, my stepmother, wearing a black wool veil that draped perfectly over her sharp, surgically tightened cheekbones. Next to her was Vance, her son, my stepbrother. Vance was 28, a Harvard Law graduate, and already possessed the calculated predator calm of a man who viewed people as spreadsheets. They thought this was the end of the line for me. They thought they had one. In about 72 hours, we would be sitting in a wood-paneled conference room downtown, and Mr. Sterling, the family's old money attorney, would hold a document with a trembling hand. His $5,000 Montblanc pen would slip from his fingers, rolling across the desk, because he would realize, too late, what I had done. But out here in the mud I kept my face blank. Let them think I was broken. People love a tragedy. The internet is full of cheap revenge stories where the victim screams and throws a fit before pulling off some cinematic stunt. Real-world power doesn't scream. Files paperwork. Talia leaned closer, the suffocating scent of her expensive Chanel No. 5 cutting through the smell of wet earth. She laid a gloved hand on my forearm. The pressure was light, theatrical. "Victoria, sweetie," she murmured, her voice smooth, dripping with a practiced upper-class sympathy that could freeze boiling water. "You look absolutely drained. Taking care of your father's affairs. It's just too much for a girl with only a basic quantitative finance degree. Let Vance step in. Let him handle Vanguard logistics. It's what your father would have wanted." I didn't pull my arm away. I looked at her, letting my shoulders drop just an inch, mimicking the posture of a beaten dog. "Thank you, Talia. I need a few days." Vance smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a technician watching a machine run exactly as programmed. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke overcoat, his eyes scanning the graveyard as if checking the perimeter. He knew the numbers. He knew exactly what they were about to inherit. Or rather, what they thought they were inheriting. The transition from the cemetery to the library of our Madison Park estate was seamless, quiet, and suffocating. The house felt too large now, filled with the echo of my father's absence and the heavy, predatory presence of his greedy heirs. The next morning, the real theater began. Mr. Sterling arrived with a leather briefcase that smelled of old ink and high billable hours. We sat around the heavy oak table. The fire was crackling, but the room remained icy. "We have a slight complication regarding the estate planning," Sterling began, clearing his throat. He looked at me with genuine pity, then avoided my eyes. Vance sat back, crossing his legs, tapping a gold cross pin against his knee. "Let's keep this efficient, Arthur. We all know the baseline." Sterling pulled out a 3-page document. A codicil. An amendment to my father's primary will, executed exactly 21 days before his heart gave out. At that time, my father was suffering from advanced vascular dementia. On his good days, he knew my name. On his bad days, he thought it was 1994. Yet, according to this paper, he possessed full testamentary capacity to restructure his entire life's work. "Your father amended the distribution," Sterling said, his voice flat, reading the legalese like an autopsy report. "The liquid assets, the international trust funds currently routed through Grand Cayman, and the real estate holdings in Palm Beach are to be transferred entirely to Talia and Vance. Victoria, you are designated as the sole beneficiary of Vanguard Logistics. 100% of the corporate stock." I looked down at my hands. My knuckles were white. I wasn't angry about the money. I was disgusted by the sheer predictability of it. Undue influence. It was written all over the document. Vance had drafted it, using his legal credentials to guide. An old man shaking hand to sign away his daughter's birthright. They had systematically stripped the estate of every dollar of hard cash, leaving me with the family business. To the public, Vanguard Logistics was a powerhouse. It owned the shipping lanes, the major docking rights along the Puget Sound, warehouses that looked like small cities. It was a crown jewel. "I don't understand," I whispered, keeping my voice small. letting it crack just a little. Father promised we would run Vanguard together. Talia sighed, a delicate, practiced sound of disappointment. Victoria, the shipping industry is brutal right now. Global supply chains are collapsing. The corporate debt is substantial. Your father wanted to shield me from that stress. He thought you had the stamina for it. She was lying, of course. They had looked at the pro forma financial statements, seen the massive valuation of the real estate the port sat on, and assumed the company was a golden goose. What they didn't see, what Vance's brilliant legal mind had overlooked because he was too busy counting the Cayman cash, was the rot hidden beneath the waterline. Vance leaned forward, his tone shifting into something deeply, menacingly polite. He spoke slowly, as if explaining long division to a child. Look, Victoria. We want to be fair here, Vance said, sliding a thick manila folder across the oak table toward me. The company is facing some heavy headwinds. In fact, if the bank calls in the primary credit line next month, Vanguard is looking at a massive liquidity crisis. If you try to contest this codicil, the litigation will drag on for years. The banks will panic. The press will get hold of it. The Wall Street Journal will have a field day with the family name. The company will collapse into Chapter 7 liquidation before you even get a trial date. I looked at the folder. Inside was a release and waiver agreement. If I signed it, I forfeited my right to sue them for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, or undue influence. In exchange, I got Vanguard Logistics. Free and clear. You're forcing me out, I said. I looked up, letting a single tear slip down my cheek. I made sure Vance watched it fall. Was the ultimate currency for an alpha male narcissist. Proof of his total dominance. We're saving you, Victoria, Vance replied softly, his voice a smooth, venomous purr. Sign the waiver. Take the company. Try to turn it around. If you fail, well, you're young. You can always start over. If you don't sign, I will personally file an injunction tomorrow morning to freeze the corporate accounts until the probate court sorts this out. You won't even be able to pay your father's funeral directors. He was good. Very good. He had mapped out every defensive move I could possibly make and blocked it with a legal chess piece. He thought he had me backed into a corner where surrender was my only logical option. What he didn't realize was that I had built the corner myself. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly as I picked up the heavy gold pen. I looked at Talia, who was watching me with the rapt attention of a vulture waiting for a heartbeat to stop. Then I looked at Vance. His eyes were wide, hungry, completely blinded by the illusion of his own intellectual superiority. If I sign this, I said, my voice barely a whisper, it's over? You leave me alone. You have our word, Victoria, Talia said, her smile returning, perfect and empty. We're family after all. I lowered the pen to the paper, right above the dotted line that would seal my fate, and theirs. The ink on the release and waiver agreement wasn't even dry before I started setting the fire. 3 weeks after the funeral, I moved into my father's old office at the Vanguard headquarters near the downtown piers. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke, old leather, and the damp, salty air blowing off Elliott Bay. It was a ghost town. The staff knew the company was bleeding cash. They looked at me with a mix of pity and indifference. To them, I was just the sacrificial lamb left to turn off the lights when the bankruptcy lawyers finally arrived. I let them think that. Especially Vance. A narcissist like my stepbrother doesn't trust information that is given to him. He only trusts information he believes he has stolen. He was a creature of backrooms and covert glances. So, I built a ghost in the machine. I hired an independent accounting firm, one with a reputation for absolute discretion and a hunger for high fees, to draft a set of pro forma financial statements. On paper, it was a routine 5-year projection, but tucked into the supplementary schedules was something else. A draft of an unannounced Department of Defense maritime logistics contract. A 48-month, $450 million federal allocation for secure military supply chain operations along the Pacific Northwest Corridor. I left the bright red folder marked classified, DoD bid review. Do not duplicate sitting right in the middle of my father's walnut desk. Then I called Vance. I told him I needed help clearing out our father's personal safe in the office. I sounded tired, stressed, fumbling. When he arrived, he wore a tailored gray charcoal suit that cost more than my monthly mortgage. He didn't look at me. He looked at the room, measuring it for his own future use. I only have 20 minutes, Victoria, he said, checking his Rolex. The probate court is finalizing the Cayman Trust transfers this afternoon. I can't open the bottom dial, I said, rubbing my temples, making sure my voice trembled slightly. The combination works, but the hinge is stuck. I'm going down to the reception desk to see if the maintenance guy has some WD-40. Can you just watch the room? Sure. Don't be long. I left the office. I didn't go to maintenance. I walked down to the end of the corridor, stood by the water cooler, and counted to 600. 10 minutes. Exactly enough time for a trained corporate lawyer to scan a desk, spot a red folder, and use his iPhone to snap high-resolution photos of every single page of a pro forma statement. When I returned, Vance was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the cargo ships. The red folder hadn't moved an inch, but the corner of the top page was slightly misaligned. Maintenance was out, I said, breathing a bit heavily. Forget it, Vance said, his tone suddenly lighter, almost jovial. His eyes had a sharp, manic gleam I recognized instantly. The predator had tasted blood. I've got a hard stop at 4. We'll handle the safe later. Why don't we get dinner tonight? You, me, and Talia. Smooth things over. You look like you need a square meal. Dinner. I blinked, playing the part of the confused victim. Where? The Rainier Club, he said, already walking toward the door. 8 o'clock. Don't be late. The Rainier Club is where Seattle's old money goes to die and its new money goes to lie. It's all dark mahogany walls, heavy velvet drapes, and the muffled sound of silver clinking against porcelain. The air inside felt thick, expensive, and completely devoid of oxygen. Talia and Vance were already seated in a private alcove at the back when I arrived. A bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon was already breathing in a crystal decanter. Talia didn't look like a grieving widow. She looked like a woman who had just cleared her calendar of an annoying obligation. She was cutting a piece of rare filet mignon with small, clinical movements. Victoria, she said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Sit. You look thin. Pale. The shipping business clearly doesn't agree with you. It's just a lot of debt, Talia, I said, sitting down but leaving my coat on. I didn't touch the wine. The short-term lines of credit are closing. I've been looking at the off-balance sheet liabilities. It's a mess. Vance smiled over the rim of his glass. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the white linen tablecloth. That's exactly why we asked you here, Victoria. We've been talking, Talia and I. Well, we feel terrible about how the will left things. We're family. We don't want to see you drown under the weight of Vanguard's failures. I kept my eyes on my plate. What are you saying, Vance? I'm saying I'll take it off your hands, he said smoothly. He pulled a crisp, white document from his breast pocket and slid it across the table. It was an equity transfer deed. We'll do a complete swap. You assign 100% of the Vanguard corporate stock back to me. In exchange, Talia and I will establish a private annuity for you. $50,000 a month. For life. Guaranteed by our personal holding company. $50,000 a month. To an outsider, it looked like a life jacket thrown to a drowning girl. To me, it was the exact measurement of their greed. They had seen the $450 million DoD contract in that red folder. They thought they were buying a gold mine for pennies on the dollar, leaving me with a tiny crumb while they walked away with the empire. 50,000? I echoed, letting my voice rise just enough to sound defensive, angry. Vanguard is worth 10 times that if I can restructure the maritime routes. Father told me. Father was losing his mind, Victoria, Talia interrupted, her polite veneer cracking for a fraction of a second, revealing the cold iron underneath. Let's not romanticize a dying man's delusions. You don't have the capital to survive the next quarter. Vance does. If you don't sign this deed tonight, he calls the note on the Madison Park estate tomorrow. You'll be homeless by Friday. Vance watched me, his face impassive, but his fingers were twitching. He was anticipating the win. He wanted me to fight because a fight made the prize feel real. I paused. I let the silence stretch until the waiter came to clear the plates. I looked out the window at the rain streaking the glass. If I sign this, I said slowly, turning my gaze back to Vance, I want out completely. No strings. No lingering ties to Vanguard's old mess. Of course, Vance said, his voice dropping into that soothing, fraudulent register he used for clients he intended to ruin. A clean break. No, I said, hardening my tone, stepping into the second phase of the trap. I mean legally clean. I know how you operate, Vance. You'll take the company, find some accounting error from 3 years ago, and sue me for breach of warranty or misrepresentation. I want an absolute hold harmless clause. Total indemnification. Vance frowned slightly. His legal instincts flickered for a second. An indemnity clause for a full equity transfer is unusual without a standard due diligence period. Then do your due diligence. I shot back, leaning forward, matching his aggression. Take 3 months. Audit every single warehouse from here to Tacoma. But while you're doing that, the banks will freeze the payroll accounts. The company will go under anyway. If you want Vanguard tonight, you take it exactly as it is. Right now. You sign a mutual release of all known and unknown claims, and you assume all liabilities, corporate and personal, associated with the firm's historical debt structures. I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was running a risk-reward matrix in his head. In his mind, the risk was an unusual indemnity clause drafted by an emotional, desperate girl. The reward was a $450 million federal contract that closed its bidding cycle in less than 36 hours. If he waited for a full audit, the contract would slip away. He couldn't let me have that money. His ego wouldn't allow it. You're being paranoid, Victoria, Talia muttered, though she looked at Vance, signaling him to close the deal. I'm being careful, I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out a pre-drafted addendum. My lawyer had finished it an hour before dinner. It was standard boilerplate legalese on the surface, but deep in the definitions section under Schedule C. Assumed liabilities, the wording was broad enough to cover the sky. Vance took the addendum. He read through it quickly, his eyes skimming the paragraphs. He was a Harvard man. He thought he could spot a trap in his sleep, but he was looking for a knife, not a slow-acting poison. He saw the words bilateral release and assumption of corporate debt, and he assumed it was just my way of running away from the bankruptcy. Fine, Vance said, pulling his Montblanc pen from his pocket. The gold nib caught the candlelight. If it makes you sleep better at night, Victoria, we'll attach the indemnity rider. Let's sign. We need a notary, I said. The club manager is a notary public, Vance replied with a cold, dismissive smirk. I'll have him come up. Let's get this over with. I sat back in the shadow of the alcove, watching him signal the waiter. My heart rate hadn't changed. My hands were perfectly steady now. The grease was on the tracks, the engine was firing, and the greedy heirs were driving the train straight toward the cliff. They just thought the view was beautiful. The club manager didn't arrive immediately. Luxury in places like the Rainier Club moves at a deliberate, unhurried pace. While we waited, the only sound in our private alcove was the low, steady hiss of the gas fireplace and the rhythmic tapping of Vance's fingers against the mahogany table. He pulled a slim iPad from his briefcase, his eyes already darting across the screen. He was reviewing the digital copy of the transfer agreement I had emailed his assistant an hour before dinner. He thought he was being thorough. He thought his Harvard degree made him immune to the oversights of ordinary men. He didn't know about Section 14.2 of the Pacific Northwest Credit Facility Omnibus. Or if he did, he didn't understand what it meant when combined with his own past sins. 3 years ago, Vance wanted to prove to my father that he was a financial prodigy. He had convinced Talia to let him use an obscure subsidiary of Vanguard Logistics, a shell company called Portside Warehousing LLC, to guarantee a $40 million private equity play in Grand Cayman. The investment crashed within 8 months. Vance buried the loss in Vanguard's intercompany ledger, utilizing a complex accounting maneuver known as transfer pricing to keep the red ink off the primary balance sheet. He thought it was a victimless crime. He thought it was gone. But Pacific Rim Bank, the primary secured creditor for Vanguard's shipping fleet, wasn't stupid. Their risk assessment team had noticed the sudden asset shift. They didn't call the loan then because my father was still alive and his personal signature carried weight in this city. Instead, they quietly inserted a cross-collateralization covenant into Vanguard's overarching revolving credit line. Cross-collateralization is a beautiful, lethal thing. It means every single asset inside the corporate structure is tied to every single debt, old and new, hidden and public. If one domino falls, the bank has the right to seize the entire row. More importantly, the covenant contained a specific acceleration clause tied to a change of control. The moment 100% of Vanguard's equity shifted to a new owner without the bank's prior written consent, the entire corporate debt, including the $40 million default from the Cayman project, would immediately mature. It would accelerate from a long-term liability to a current demand note due within 5 business days. And because of the way Vance had structured his original guarantee through portside warehousing, that debt wasn't non-recourse. It was fully recourse. It was designed to pierce the corporate veil automatically upon default, attaching itself directly to the personal assets of the principal shareholder. Vance wanted the company tonight. He wanted to claim that $450 million Department of Defense contract before anyone else could get their hands on it. His own greed was driving him to trigger the very trap he had built for himself 3 years ago. "The language in Section 4 looks standard," Vance murmured, his eyes reflecting the blue glow of the tablet screen. He didn't look up. "But your lawyer has a very old-fashioned way of phrasing the indemnity definitions. It's clunky." "Thomas is 62, I said, my voice flat, deliberately submissive. "He's been doing my father's probate work since the 90s. If you want to change the phrasing, we can call it off. We can wait until next month." Vance's thumb froze on the screen. The mention of waiting always works on an arrogant man. It signals a loss of momentum. To a guy like Vance, momentum is everything. "No," he said quickly, his voice tightening. "We don't need to delay. I'll just have my associate review it over the phone." He dialed his office. I watched him. His jaw muscles clenched as he waited for the call to connect. He was tense, not because he suspected me, but because he was terrified that the DoD bidding window would close before he could sign the paperwork. He was chasing an illusion. "Marcus," Vance said into his phone, his tone instantly shifting into the sharp, demanding register of a senior partner. "I'm looking at the addendum for the Vanguard equity transfer. Look at Schedule C under assumed liabilities. The language is broad. It uses the phrase asterisk including but not limited to all historical, contingent, and unliquidated obligations of the parent and its affiliates. Asterisk, is that going to give us an issue with the Cayman entities?" I didn't breathe. I picked up my water glass, the cold condensation slippery against my palms. On the other end of the line, Marcus was likely sitting in a cubicle exhausted, looking at a 100-page document under a tight deadline. He would see the words historical and contingent. He would know that Vanguard was a shipping giant with old environmental liabilities and union pension disputes. He would assume that was what the clause was protecting against. "Vance," I interrupted softly, making sure Talia heard me. "If Marcus is going to rewrite the whole contract, I'm leaving. I didn't want to give up the company anyway. This was your idea." Talia reached out, her sharp fingernails clicking against the stem of her wine glass. "Vance, stop overthinking it. The girl is giving you the company for a life annuity. Don't let your junior associates kill the deal over standard boilerplate." Vance glared at me, then spoke back into the phone. "Marcus, hold on. Look at page 74. Appendix G. The asset valuation schedule. Is the depreciation on the 3 Panamax vessels calculated correctly?" That was the decoy. 2 days ago, I had spent 4 hours with Thomas Miller altering the depreciation figures for our 3 oldest cargo ships on page 74. We had used a straight-line method instead of an accelerated double-declining balance, creating an artificial $5 million discrepancy in the book value. It was a glaring, obvious error for any competent corporate attorney. It was exactly the kind of mistake a proud Harvard lawyer would spot immediately, congratulate himself for finding, and focus on to the exclusion of everything else. "Yeah, I see it," Vance said into the phone, a small, triumphant smirk forming at the corner of his mouth. "The book value on the Vanguard Sentinel is overstated by $1.2 million. Good catch, Marcus. Have the assistant type up a corrected page 74 and email it to the club's printer downstairs. We'll swap the sheet out before we execute." He hung up. He looked at me with a condescending pity that made my skin crawl. He thought he had just saved himself $5 million. He thought he had outsmarted me again. Your lawyer is sloppy, Victoria, Vance said, sliding the iPad back into his case. He almost cost you the credibility of your asset schedule. But don't worry. We're fixing it downstairs right now. We'll use the corrected page. Thank you, Vance, I whispered. I looked down at the tablecloth, hiding the sudden tightness in my throat. Not from fear. From the sheer dark thrill of watching it happen exactly as I had planned. The human mind is a fragile thing when wrapped in vanity. When you show a narcissist a small flaw in your armor, they will focus their entire gaze on that single spot. They will drive their lance into it, convinced they are delivering the killing blow, completely unaware that you have already removed the floor beneath their feet. The club manager returned, followed by a young man in a white apron carrying a stack of warm, freshly printed paper. The manager placed a heavy brass notary seal on the edge of the table. The metal made a dull, heavy clink against the wood. Mr. Vance, Miss Victoria, the manager said, his voice hushed and reverent. I have the corrected page 74 from your office. I've already inserted it into the master copy. Excellent, Vance said. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, adjusting his posture for the formal act of signing. He looked like a man about to be crowned. Let's get the signatures done. Talia, you need to sign as the witness for the holding company execution. I watched the young notary open his logbook. He checked our IDs with a bored bureaucratic efficiency. He didn't care about the names on the paper. He didn't care that Vanguard Logistics was about to change hands. To him, this was just $50 an hour and a stamp on a piece of parchment. Vance took the gold Montblanc pen from his pocket. He didn't hesitate. He flipped to the signature page of the main deed, scribbled his name with a wide, aggressive flourish, and pushed the document toward his mother. Talia signed her name just as quickly, her diamond rings catching the dim amber light of the chandelier. Then Vance turned to the addendum, the one containing page 74, the one containing Appendix G. He didn't reread the definitions on page 73. He didn't look at the small print that defined the scope of the personal liability waiver. His eyes were fixed entirely on the fresh, clean ink of the corrected page 74, the proof of his own intelligence. He signed the addendum. The notary took the pages, aligned them with a sharp thwack against the table, and pressed his heavy steel seal down onto the paper. The sound of the spring mechanism releasing was loud in the small room. Click-clack. It was done. The equity had transferred. The change of control was legally binding. The 5-day countdown for Pacific Rim Bank's $40 million demand note had just begun, and Vance had quietly, legally signed away the protection of his corporate shield. Well, Victoria, Vance said, sliding the executed documents into his leather briefcase and snapping the brass locks shut. It's official. You're a retired lady of leisure. Enjoy your $50,000 a month. I stood up, slowly pulling my wool coat around my shoulders. I didn't smile. I didn't shake his hand. I intend to, Vance, I said. I turned and walked out of the alcove, leaving them alone with the expensive wine and the heavy, suffocating warmth of their temporary victory. As I stepped through the heavy glass doors of the Rainier Club and into the cold, clean Seattle rain, I finally let myself breathe. The trap had been set. The greedy heirs had signed. Now all that was left was the execution. 3 days later, the trap didn't close with a loud snap. It closed with the soft electronic beep of a high-speed scanner. We were on the 41st floor of the 4th and Madison building, packed into Arthur Sterling's primary conference room. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass, the Seattle skyline was swallowed by a wall of low, bruising fog that rolled off the Pacific. Inside, the air conditioning hummed a low, expensive vibration, chilling the room to a crisp 68 degrees. The mahogany table was covered in leather-bound closing binders. This was the formal execution of the estate partition, the final irreversible logging of my father's assets into the public record. Talia sat to my left, wrapped in a cream-colored knit dress that screamed quiet wealth, her fingers idly tracing the gold clasp of her handbag. Vance sat across from me. He hadn't stopped checking his phone since we sat down. The federal bidding portal for the Department of Defense maritime contract closed at exactly noon. It was currently 10:14 a.m. He needed these certified closing documents uploaded to the federal system within 90 minutes to secure Vanguard's eligibility. He was a man running on pure adrenaline and calculated greed. his eyes bright with the manic energy of an apex predator about to secure its multi-million-dollar kill. "Let's expedite this, Arthur," Vance said, his voice clipped, cutting through the silence of the room. He tapped his index finger against the polished wood. "The corporate registry in Olympia has already processed the preliminary name change for the holding company. We just need the court-appointed referee to sign off on the asset assignment schedules, and we're done." Arthur Sterling didn't look up from his reading glasses. He was 71, a man who had spent 40 years moving billions of dollars through the shadows of the Pacific Northwest. He liked order. He liked slow. "The law doesn't run on your venture capital clock, Vance," Arthur said dryly. He adjusted the heavy gold frames on his nose. "We have 42 separate titles to transfer, along with the global equity swap from Victoria's corporate accounts to yours. Takes time to verify the wet ink signatures from the Rainier Club execution." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded over a cheap manila folder in my lap. I wore no makeup. I wore an oversized charcoal sweater that made me look smaller, swallowed up by the leather corporate chair. I looked like a girl who had spent the last 72 hours crying into her pillow over the loss of her father's legacy. Vance glanced at me, a brief flash of irritation crossing his face before settling into that smooth, patronizing mask he wore so well. "Victoria," he said, his voice dropping into that low, practiced register of family solidarity. "You've done the right thing here. Truly." Marcus spent the weekend reviewing the current operational accounts of Vanguard's Terminal 4 in Tacoma. "The labor union disputes alone would have tied you up in federal court for the next 3 years. You aren't built for that kind of knife fight. The $50,000 a month. It's clean. It's safe." "I just want it over, Vance," I said, keeping my voice thin, slightly breathless. I looked toward the window, avoiding his gaze. "I just want to make sure the bank doesn't come after the Madison Park house. You promised." "The indemnity rider handles everything," Vance said, his smile widening slightly, the satisfaction of total victory radiating from him. "The moment Arthur logs these master deeds, every single scrap of Vanguard's historical liability belongs to my holding company. You're completely insulated. You have my word." His word. A currency worth less than the paper it was printed on. Arthur Sterling sighed a deep rattling sound and reached for the first master binder. "All right. Let's begin the final verification. This is the global settlement deed, incorporating the Rainier Club addenda executed on the 28th. The clerk, a quiet young woman in a sharp navy blazer, began scanning the executed signature pages, uploading them directly into the King County Superior Court probate portal. Beep page 1. Beep page 12. Every beep was a nail in their coffin. I watched Vance's reflection in the dark glass of the window. He was leaning back now, his chest expanded, his fingers interlaced. Over his stomach. He was already spending the $450 million defense allocation. He was probably thinking about the house he was going to buy in Medina, right on the water next to the tech billionaires. He had used an old man's dementia to rob a daughter, and he thought the world was rewarding him for his brilliance. Then Arthur stopped. The sound of the pages turning ceased entirely. The only noise in the room was the low, steady rattle of the HVAC vents. I didn't move a muscle. I kept my eyes fixed on the gray fog outside. Arthur was looking at page 73 of the compiled master deed, the page immediately preceding the corrected asset depreciation schedule that Vance had so proudly fixed at the Rainier Club. Arthur's hand stayed flat on the paper. For 5 seconds, 10 seconds, he didn't breathe. I watched the side of his face. The old lawyer's jaw dropped slightly, his skin turning a strange, curdled gray color under the fluorescent lights. The veins along his temples swelled, pulsing with a sudden violent rush of blood. "Arthur?" Vance asked, his eyebrows knitting together. He leaned forward, his elbows hitting the table. "What's the holdup? We're on a clock here." Arthur didn't answer him. He slowly, deliberately turned the page to page 74. His eyes scanned the text line by line, moving back and forth with terrifying speed. His chest began to heave under his tailored waistcoat. Then his fingers began to shake. It started as a small tremor in his thumb, but within seconds, his entire right hand was trembling so violently that the edge of the heavy bond paper rattled against the desk. He reached for his gold Montblanc pen, the one he had used to sign my father's documents for 30 years, and tried to place it in his pocket. His hand failed him. The $5,000 pen slipped from his slick, sweaty fingers, struck the edge of the mahogany table with a sharp clack, and rolled across the wood, leaving a thin trail of black ink before dropping onto the carpet. Arthur didn't even look down at it. He looked up at Vance, and the expression in the old man's eyes wasn't anger. It was pure, unadulterated horror. "Vance," Arthur whispered. His voice was gone, replaced by a dry, cracked rattle that sounded like dry leaves scraping across concrete. What did you sign at the club?" Talia stopped tracing her purse. Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing into two cold slits. "Arthur? What are you talking about? It's a standard equity transfer." "No," Arthur said, his voice rising, breaking on the vowels as he looked at the document as if it were a coiled viper. "No, it's not. Vance, look at the defined terms under Section 14.2 of the Integrated Omnibus Schedule. Look at the cross-collateralization carve-outs." Vance lunged across the table, his polite Ivy League composure vaporizing in an instant. He snatched the leather binder out of Arthur's hands, his face flushed a deep angry purple. "It's boilerplate, Arthur," Vance snapped, his eyes tearing through the text. "We checked the vessel depreciation on page 74. Marcus verified the figures. You looked at the ship values, you idiot," Arthur shouted, his professional decorum completely shattering. He slammed both palms onto the table, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "You didn't look at the definition of affiliated corporate obligations on the preceding page. Victoria didn't draft this to protect herself from bankruptcy, Vance. She drafted it to incorporate the portside warehousing defaults directly into the primary equity transfer." Vance's eyes froze on the page. I watched his face. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The color drained from his cheeks first, leaving his skin a sickly translucent white that made his stubble look like dirt. His mouth opened slightly, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. This says," Vance stammered, his fingers gripping the edge of the binder so hard the cardboard groaned. "This says the transferee assumes all personal guarantees associated with Portside Warehousing LLC, as a condition of the change of control." No, that's not right. Portside is a separate entity. The corporate veil protects. "The corporate veil is gone, Vance," Arthur yelled, his voice shaking with a mix of terror and disbelief. "Look at the signature block. By signing the Rainier Club addendum with the absolute hold harmless waiver, you didn't just take Vanguard's stock. You personally guaranteed the $40 million default note with Pacific Rim Bank. And because you triggered the change of control clause without their prior written waiver, the bank called the loan." Vance's phone on the table began to buzz. Then it buzzed again. Two separate, consecutive vibrations that slid the phone an inch across the polished wood. He didn't pick it up. He couldn't. His fingers were paralyzed, curled into stiff claws over the leather binder. I slowly reached into my lap and pulled out the manila folder. I opened it, pulled out 3 sheets of crisp, white paper bearing the official blue watermark of the State of Washington Office of the Insurance Commissioner and the U.S. Internal Revenue Service (IRS), and slid them gently across the table toward him. "You were right about one thing, Vance," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was the flat, dead tone of a machine executing a pre-programmed algorithm. The shipping business is brutal right now, especially when the company hasn't paid its federal maritime fuel taxes in 48 months. Vance stared at the papers. His eyes tracked the words IRS Whistleblower Office, Claim Form 211. "My father didn't lose his mind, Vance," I continued, leaning forward just enough to force him to look into my eyes. "He knew exactly what you did with the portside accounts in Grand Cayman 3 years ago. He kept the records in his personal safe at home, the one you didn't have the combination to. I spent the last 6 months formatting those ledgers into a federal disclosure package. Under the IRS whistleblower program, the informant receives 30% of all recovered back taxes and penalties. The current assessment against Vanguard's historical offshore entities is $120 million. You blew the whistle on your own company?" Talia gasped, her voice shrill, her perfect aristocratic mask completely gone. She stood up, her chair screeching against the floorboards. You ruined the family name. I didn't ruin anything. Talia, I said, looking up at her with a cold, level stare. I transferred a bankrupt corporation to its greedy heirs. Exactly like you wanted. But because Vance was so eager to steal the DoD contract, he signed the addendum that transfers 100% of that federal tax liability from Vanguard's corporate shell directly to his personal estate. No, Vance whispered, his voice cracking as he stared at the screen of his phone, which was now flashing with an incoming call from his managing partner at the fund. No, the debt can be restructured. We can file for Chapter 11. We can freeze the assets. You can't, I said smoothly. Check Section 11 of the addendum you executed. You waive the right to seek protection under the Federal Bankruptcy Code for any liability arising from the assumed portside guarantees. It's a non-dischargeable personal obligation. Pacific Rim Bank isn't going to restructure Vance. They're executing the writ of attachment on your Cayman Trust accounts right now. The court order was signed by Judge Martinez at 9 o'clock this morning. The heavy oak door of the conference room clicked open. 2 men in charcoal wool overcoats walked in. They didn't look like lawyers. They had the square, heavy-set build of federal marshals. One of them held a thick manila envelope. The other kept his hands folded neatly in front of his waist. Mr. Vance? The first man asked, his voice echoing off the glass walls with a flat, bureaucratic authority. Vance didn't look up. He sat paralyzed, staring at the ink stain his Montblanc pen had left on the pristine carpet, his entire world turning into dust before his eyes. The clock on the wall struck 10:30 a.m. He had 90 minutes left to bid on the contract of a lifetime, and he didn't even own the chair he was sitting in. The lead marshal didn't draw a weapon. In rooms like this on the 41st floor you don't need iron. You just need federal authority and a certified stamp. He unzipped a heavy black nylon briefcase, his movements methodical, completely unaffected by the thick, suffocating panic in the room. He pulled out a 3-inch stack of legal documents bound by heavy blue backing paper. Vance, the marshal said, his voice a flat Midwestern drone. I'm Special Agent Miller, IRS Criminal Investigation. I'm serving you with a federal asset freezing order issued under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1345. Effective immediately, all personal accounts, liquid assets, and real property held under your name, your mother's name, and the corporate entities listed in Schedule Alpha are seized by the United States government. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. Vance didn't scream. He didn't drop to his knees. He just sat there, his head tilted slightly to the side, staring at the blue paper as if trying to translate a foreign language. The fine microscopic veins in his eyes had ruptured, turning the whites of his eyes a map of thin, blood-red rivers. He looked old. For the first time in his 28 years of manicured Ivy League perfection, he looked small. To his left, Talia broke. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic faint. Her knees simply forgot how to hold weight. She slid out of her leather corporate chair, her body making a soft, brushing sound against the mahogany table before she hit the hardwood floor. Her arms flailed once, catching the strap of her oversized black Hermes Constance bag. The bag hit the floor upside down. The heavy gold H-clasp tore open with a sharp metallic snap, spilling its contents across the polished wood. $100 bill. A gold-plated Cartier lipstick case. A small amber plastic bottle of prescription anti-anxiety pills. The little round white tablets rolled across the floorboards, scattered like tiny teeth, stopping right against Arthur Sterling's dropped Montblanc pen. Nobody helped her up. Not the marshals. Not Arthur. Not her son. Vance slowly raised his eyes from the floor, tracking the line of the wood up to where my hands were resting flat on the table. He was looking for something. A flinch. A smile. A spark of sadistic joy. I gave him nothing. My face was a blank slate, cold and level as a frozen pond. That's the part that hurts a narcissist the most. They don't just want to win. They want their enemies to care. They need the emotional feedback to feel alive. When you give them absolute chilling indifference, you deny them their own existence. Vance's voice was barely a rasp, a dry rattle in the back of his throat. He cleared it, his chest heaving under his sweat-soaked shirt. You knew. You set the entire thing up from the day he died. The safe. The red folder. The vessel depreciation. You knew I'd look. I didn't force you to do anything, Vance, I said. My voice was quiet, steady, carrying the calm authority of a judge reading a verdict. I didn't make you draft that fraudulent codicil while our father was dying in his bed. I didn't make you hide $40 million of bad debt in Grand Cayman 3 years ago. And I certainly didn't force you to sign that equity transfer at the Rainier Club. I stood up, slowly buttoning my dark wool overcoat. In fact, I continued, looking down at him, if I remember correctly, I cried. I begged you and Talia not to take Vanguard away from me. I told you it was a mess. I told you I wanted to keep my father's legacy. But you couldn't help yourself, could you? You saw a $450 million government bone, and you had to snap your teeth around it. Your own greed was your judge, Vance. I was just the clerk who filed the paperwork. He reached out, his hand shaking so violently, he couldn't even close his fingers into a fist. Victoria, wait. We can fix the cross-collateral terms. We can hire an appellate team. Arthur can't help you, Vance, I said, not looking back as I moved toward the glass double doors of the conference room. Arthur has his own problems. The Department of Justice is going to want to know exactly how that codicil was executed 21 days before my father passed. I suggest he gets his own representation. The clerk in the navy blazer stood by the door, her face white, her fingers frozen on the keypad of the scanner. She looked at me with a profound, terrifying awe. I stepped past her, my heels making a crisp, rhythmic click against the terrazzo floor of the lobby. The elevator ride down from the 41st floor was silent. The descent was fast, the sudden drop in pressure popping my ears as the digital numbers flickered backward toward 0. When I stepped out of the 4th and Madison building, the Seattle rain had finally stopped. The bruising fog was lifting over Elliott Bay, revealing a sharp, slate-gray sky that smelled of wet asphalt, salt water, and cold iron. I walked to the curb and raised my hand. A yellow cab pulled over immediately, its tires splashing through a puddle near the drain. I got into the back seat, the vinyl cold against my legs, and pulled the door shut, cutting off the roar of the downtown traffic. Where to, lady? The driver asked, looking at me through the rearview mirror. Madison Park, I said. The estate on the water. The cab pulled out into the lane. I leaned my head back against the worn headrest, watching the glass towers of the financial district slide past the window. The Madison Park house was mine now, free and clear. Because the cross-collateralization clauses Vance had triggered had pushed all of Vanguard's debt onto his personal holdings, the bank had no claim on the historical family real estate. The primary trust funds, the clean ones, the accounts my grandfather had established before Talia ever set foot in this city, were intact, routed directly to my private accounts through a non-recourse asset protection structure. The IRS whistleblower payout would take time. The federal government moves with the slow, grinding pace of a glacier. But 30% of a $120 million recovery is $36 million. Clean money. Federal money. Money that had been washed through the clean hands of justice. People think revenge is an emotional act. They think it's born from anger, from hot blood and late-night tears. They're wrong. True revenge, the kind that leaves nothing but ash in its wake, is an exercise in pure mathematics. It's about knowing your opponent's flaws so perfectly, so intimately, that you can predict their next step before they even take it. You don't have to build a gallows for them. You just have to hand them the rope and let them convince themselves it's a golden necktie. I looked out the window as the cab turned onto the tree-lined streets of Madison Park, the heavy hemlocks dropping fat, clear beads of water onto the pavement. The world looked different now. Clearer. Sharper. They say the best way to destroy a demon isn't to fight it with a sword, but to build it a magnificent throne made of pure gold, right on the edge of a jagged, bottomless abyss. And then, you just stand back, fold your hands, and watch it proudly step up to claim the seat.